Hi, I'm Alex Mitchell and I'm the creator of Cancer Stories. Cancer Stories is a video diary program which is designed to help people like yourself manage their cancer. And the key aim is to record previous patients' experiences, really a wide variety of cancers. And these are patients who are genuine, real patients from Leicestershire who've given their consent to allow us to record their story onto DVD or the internet. What we ask those patients is really to give a brief account over 30 or 60 minutes. How did they manage with their diagnosis? And hopefully by watching their account, you'll be able to pick out some common themes from one or more of those videos. And those common themes might be things like what resources are available locally or nationally, or how do families cope, or how do people themselves manage with those awkward stages, either the initial diagnosis or the complications of treatment, or perhaps psychological and emotional complications, which are sometimes overlooked. So overall, we hope that by watching the video diary program, you'll be able to take some positives from other people's accounts, and hopefully that will help you better cope with your situation, whatever that is at the current time. Thanks for watching.
My name is Lars Helgeson. I was born in Sweden, in the south of Sweden, in 1934, and studied in Sweden. I studied industrial engineering. And when I was 27 years of age, I was offered a contract to come over to England to work, a 2-year contract, which now has expanded to last April. It was 50 years that I have actually lived in England. Mainly because I've been very satisfied with life here, and I have really no desire to move back to my native country. I came to England to Yorkshire, Wakefield in Yorkshire, which perhaps isn't the most pleasing town or city, but after 7-8 years I moved to Leicester, where I gradually worked myself up in a large textile company called Cora. We employed about 6,000 people in this country, and we had a factory in Canada too. And I served there for 10 years as chief executive until I retired when I was 65. After that, I did consultancy work. I worked for Department of Trade and Industry. I was involved in contracts with Leicester University and Montfort University. Then came the shock, and in 2003 I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which I didn't know at the time what it exactly was, but I felt rather tired for several months, and I had a number of tests. In the end, I was sent to Royal Infirmary, where I had blood tests, and I was diagnosed to have multiple myeloma, which I had no idea what it was at the time, being an ignorant Swede. On questioning it, I realized it was bone marrow cancer. I suspected it was in that direction in any case, as I hadn't had any visual signs of cancer. And it all started from there. I was given 18 months to 2 years life expectancy, and that is now just over 9 years ago, so I've been rather fortunate in my life.
Lars Helgeson's come in today, and Lars, thanks for joining us here. I know I explained a little bit about the Cancer Stories video program to you, but I appreciate you coming in today. I think, having heard a little bit about your story before, people will be very interested in your insights into myeloma. But there's also family history in your direct family of other cancers, which we'll go into if you don't mind. But I also know from your background, you held quite a senior job prior to the diagnosis. What was that job?
Well, I consider myself to have been very lucky in my career. I got this opportunity to come over to England to work. Strange country, new environment, new people.
Yes.
Didn't know anybody more than the officials at the company where I came, which was in Wakefield in Yorkshire. And then I moved on to Leicester to a company called Cora, and that had it was a large organization, public limited company, over 6,000 people. And I think the most difficult thing I've experienced there was the fact that I knew nobody. And when you come into industry or any kind of commercial organization, it's very helpful to have contacts. And I had no contact whatsoever. So everything I had to do was hard work and easy to be tripped up, actually.
What year was that you came over to the UK?
1962.
Really?
Yes, I was married then and had a daughter, 2 years old. So it was a bit of an adventure for us all. Are you really sure you know what you're doing? Because I had a reasonable future staked out for me in the business. I was working in a large company in Sweden. And I felt that I needed to broaden my views. It was felt by many over there that England in those days were not the most advanced in industrial sense, and that I would have to struggle with a lot of old-fashioned ideas and class situations.
You noticed that when you came over?
Very much so. I was fortunate though, because the first people in Wakefield, they needed influence from outside, so they were very cooperative and helpful. It was more difficult when I came to Leicester and came to Cora. That was a real mammoth task.
And I'm sure things were very different in the 60s and 70s here to what they are now.
I'm sure they are, yes, but of course very competitive. And in any case, I managed to get promoted at various levels and until I reached the top job.
Your prognosis when they gave you that prognosis was actually quite limited.
Yes, it was.
You've long since outdone their estimates.
Yes. Well, it was grade 2, the cancer, and I had it had actually gone into my kidneys too. So
it had it from the beginning?
Yeah.
So why don't we tell the viewers about the diagnosis and how that was in 2003? What went on then?
Well, I had a number of tests at the General Hospital, and the doctor, who was a golfing friend actually, said to me, I can't find anything, no growth or anything abnormal, so I'll have to send you to the Royal Infirmary and have blood tests and see how they are, if they can find anything. And that's how, when I came down on an appointment, they told me that it was multiple myeloma.
So it'd been picked up how? On the tests?
On the blood test.
On the blood test?
Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes with myeloma being a less common cancer, and even amongst the hematological conditions, not necessarily the most common condition, it can be overlooked sometimes.
Yes. No, this was the first blood test I've had of that nature, so they picked it up more or less straight away.
Well, that's good. And then you'd received that news, but I don't think you really knew what that meant at the time.
Well, I didn't. It was a shock, and I've always been very independent and wanted to face up to things myself. But I did go round to my eldest daughter, who lives in Leicester, and told her about it. I rang my wife before that, actually, and she had been talking to someone, so she knew what multiple myeloma was. And I think the shock was worse for them than it was for me. Certainly my daughter was very upset about it. My wife took it more in the stride, if you like.
Now, was that because in your case the cancer seemed to be quite advanced at the start and the information you've been given on your outlook was fairly limited? Was that what made it worse?
Probably. My daughter was a dentist, and she has some medical knowledge and was more familiar with what the problem was. My wife has no medical knowledge, so she kind of felt, well, cancer is nowadays solvable or treatable, so it probably isn't so bad. And not until I came home and told her that there was no treatment for it, to cure it, she realized the impact of it.
Now, were you one of those people who wanted to get as much information as possible about the condition, or did you want to leave it to the doctors and the nurses to do their job the best they could?
Well, I wanted to see about the treatment. My daughter got me a book about a Don in Oxford who had been diagnosed with the same illness. And he had been advised by his friends not to have any medical treatment for it, but entirely go over to herbal treatment and the natural treatments. It took me some time. I was given time to decide whether I wanted medical treatment, and which was helpful, because with this book I had the two alternatives, and I took me probably a couple of weeks before I finally just decided that I would go for the medical treatment.
Were you seriously considering not taking up the medical treatment at all?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
But then I suppose I have reasonable amount of common sense, and I said to myself, if all the medical fraternity have been working on treatments and medication for years and decades and centuries, I can't just reject it. It would be totally wrong on me to discard it and say it's no good.
I totally understand that, but I suppose I need to understand the opposite view as well, which is, why would some people discard it in that situation, or why were you considering not taking it up?
Because of the side effects of the treatments.
Yeah.
And there are times, I have to say, there has been times when I wondered whether I took the right decision. But 9 years later, I'm bound to say to myself that I did. But it was, I wouldn't say it was touch and go. I think my daughter felt that I should consider it seriously.
Yes. I mean, would there be any reason that you couldn't have all possible options at the same time?
Well, I did think of that, but I think one might mitigate against the other, and the treatment probably natural treatment probably wouldn't have the same effect if I had medical treatment.
Are you an advocate of the complementary and non-medical natural treatment?
I do think that originally all medication comes from plants and nature, and therefore in the right context and the right consistency, I think there is a lot in it.
I guess one of the problems there is finding the right non-medical treatment for you.
Yes.
Because not everything is well documented like the medical treatment.
Exactly. The research is relatively limited and it's very commercial, so you can read about it. Everything is curing every illness, and it's not really reliable from that point of view. But something that happened to me about a year after, I got in contact with a lady who gives aromatherapy. And she was hesitant to start with because she said my resistance in my body was so strong that she had great difficulty of treating me. But since the beginning, I've had aromatherapy probably every fortnight. When she's available, I have it every week. She's Ecuadorian, has set up a small research center in Ecuador, and she travels there quite a lot. So she's away for 6 weeks at a time. She's now a doctor of pharmacology, and so she has medical background too. But that made wonders for me. There were times when I felt really exhausted and unable to cope with matters, and I came to her and she gave me, and the oils she's using are natural oils that she mixes together herself. So one might say there would be people who would say, well, that's kind of hocus pocus, but to me it has been real reality.
At the end of the day, it's about finding things that work for you, isn't it?
Yes. I talked to the consultant at Royal Infirmary, Dr. Chapman, and she said, if you feel it does you good, you carry on with it. It's no harm. The same thing as she said, my wife, soon as I came home and had told her about it, she from a friend had got advice of getting literature from the cancer center in Bristol, which I believe is quite, or was in those days, quite well known. And we got a big file of literature, and they were advocating specifically the diets and so on. And I tried. I gave up coffee and tea, but I wasn't particularly keen on it in any case. I had a Macmillan nurse coming visit me in the beginning, and I said to her, I'm not giving up a glass of wine with my meal in the evening, because if I do that, I might as well top myself, because there is no pleasure in life unless you can enjoy something. And she said I would do exactly the same. She said it would do you more harm to deny yourself something that you really enjoy than the harm of the illness itself. And that was endorsed by the consultants actually. Don't deny yourself something, but everything in moderation.
Yes, I'm sure that's, again, good advice. And it's really about focusing on quality of life, not just quantity. I mean, theoretically, we could all do things that improve our longevity. But it's also about having maximizing that time so that you enjoy what time you have. Whatever that
exactly.
is.
Yes.
So what treatments did you have, the medical treatments now? Which one?
Well, I've had, it started with VAD treatment, and then I've had about 5 or 6 Velcaid I can't recall exactly the names of them, but 5 or 6, even 7 treatments. The last one, I had them until the protein level started to increase, so they had no more effect. And the last one was thalidomide, which I had for 2.5 years, which was longer than I think anybody else had it. But in the end, I couldn't take any more. And then I carried on. I finished that in January 2012. And I carried on with steroids until about 2 months ago. But then that started to affect me too with side effects.
Which were the main side effects you really struggled with through this time?
Total fatigue and lack of energy. I've had things like headaches and sore throats or mouth and stomach upsets and so on. But the most depressing thing to me was the inability to do things that I wanted to do.
Now, given you were previously very active, how would you describe that effect to other people who are watching who maybe can't quite place what the nature of that fatigue is like?
Well, I reached the conclusion that I didn't want to do anything. I always have had a principle in my work and in private life that if I had something to do it straight away. Get it over and done with. But I just couldn't generate enough power in myself and energy in myself to be able to get down to a task, even if it was just an academic task like reading or something like that. I just didn't have the desire.
That was tiring as well, was it?
Yeah.
Even simple things.
Absolutely.
But I detect there that the motivation was also impaired. But was that because there was no satisfaction in trying and then failing? Or was it genuinely that your level of interest at baseline was affected anyway?
Well, I felt very useless. I felt that I had nothing more that I could contribute to. I have been, in normal working life, I was a trustee of number of trusts, and I was in a number of organizations that I suppose were social, to social benefit of society, you know. And when I felt that I could do nothing more in that respect, I just felt totally wasted. Many of these organizations, you are retired when you're 75. And I'm 78 now, so when I was 75, I carried on with most of them. I was involved with the universities, both of them in Leicester. Sir Thomas White. I was the General Commissioner of Taxes, and when they said, "Oh, you're 75, you're due to retire," it was as if the legs had been cut off myself. You have nothing else to live for. You have nothing else to do.
I mean, in a way, it was reminding me of people who retire anyway to no ill health grounds. They just have to stop, and then they feel really somewhat at a loss of what to do. But you had that and the ill health issues going on, so that it wasn't easy to replace one role with another for you. I think because your energy level and motivation were affected, you felt quite stuck.
Well, I felt that there is a purpose in life. I'm not a religious man, but I suppose the easiest thing is to describe me as an agnostic. I believe there must be some kind of spiritual presence somewhere, but I feel there must be a purpose for every living being, and you must find that purpose. And I suppose my purpose now is my family, because I've had such support, both by friends or family, and my wife has. I mean, I wouldn't have coped without her. It's been just unbelievable, and that is very important. But you see, you find friendship, and people are trying very hard to help you, and you just have to respond to that and be grateful for it. And it's very easy to dismiss these things and say, you don't know what it's like. Because one thing I have realized, which was quite startling to me, if you haven't had it yourself, you can never realize how bad it can be. But then you also know that there are improvements that take place, and when they come, you feel more content with life.
I mean, it's interesting what you say there, because it helps reframe how people offer and how you receive those offers. In other words, you could be right that nobody can really ever understand fully your degree of suffering on any particular day.
No.
But it doesn't completely negate their offer. In other words, if you take up an offer, no matter how small, it might just help you a little bit.
Absolutely.
Even if somebody, by helping, can't really overcome what you're going through.
Yeah. You must never turn anyone away. Because majority of people mean very well for you.
Yeah.
And that kind of feeling is very important to you. And I felt that very strongly, I have to say.
All of these resources, whether it be friends, family, your internal resources, things that you come across, experts, sources of information, they can all chip away at the big problem.
Yes.
That diagnosis and living with it.
Yes.
So that you gradually start to feel worthwhile again.
Yeah. I have never ever felt that, I felt poor enough to say, perhaps it isn't worth it. But I know that has just been a fleeting thought. I have never ever kind of given up, because I know or feel that there is something better to come, even though it's only by degrees, but it's better than when you feel it's worst.
That's interesting. What's also interesting to me is this idea that you yourself have had a lot of different roles in life before the illness, and you have to some extent transferred your skills into different areas. And when you're unwell, if you can do that again whilst unwell, it's an advantage. In other words, if you have one role, let's take an example, driving, and you have to stop, but you just are fixated on, I can't drive anymore, it's very hard to get over that, because you just concentrate on the loss.
Yes.
But if you can move your skills or assets to another area and begin almost again, it gives you something to aim for.
Yes, that's exactly what has happened to me. I gave up driving, not because I couldn't drive or had an accident or anything, but because I felt if I was involved in an accident, even if it wasn't my fault, I wouldn't stop blaming myself. So I felt it was just as well not to bother with it.
But I'm assuming you felt vulnerable whilst driving for a little while.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
But it's not been a big loss to me.
No, you've managed to deal with it.
Yeah, I found other ways of, it puts more pressure on my wife and friends.
It's interesting there that you gave up driving yourself, meaning that you were somewhat in control of the loss.
Yes.
And that can make a difference. If you're told, that's it, you can never drive, it's harder in some ways.
Massive difference. Massive difference.
And of course, when one is unwell, when anyone's unwell, you're told a lot of negatives. Don't do this, stop that, come here, do that, be a patient, take this drug. It's almost invariable
people will feel at some point almost like a victim of the illness for a period of time. It's important to try not to feel like that, though.
Yeah, I have to say I found a lot of encouragement from my daughter, who I mentioned before. She was a brilliant dentist, lovely girl, very fit, and 2 years ago she passed away from cancer too, breast cancer in her case.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And that was, it took away some of the pain that I had for myself, if you like, the self-pity, if you like. But that to me was probably the worst. Well, it was the worst thing that has ever happened to me, worse than the diagnosis on myself. To have your life taken away when you're 50, and in prime life, it's very disastrous. But she was wonderful. She was at the ball at the Hope Foundation in the summer of that year. She just come back from Ecuador, where she had been with my aromatherapy friend, and she was at the ball, and we have a video of her speaking at the ball, actually, and I think that was in August, and she passed away in November.
How long was she unwell with the breast cancer?
2 years.
Just 2 years?
Yes.
It's not a great deal of time.
No, it was very aggressive, very aggressive. But she raised a lot of money for Hope Foundation. She got a fellowship. She raised enough money to get a fellowship there. And being friends of the founders there, Alison and Jim Wilson, it was rather nice that she was offered a fellowship after having raised a lot of money, you know, which to some degree, but she was so brave, and she managed to cope with it very well. But then a year later, in fact last summer, my wife got breast cancer, and she had to have surgery and treatment. And she's she is wonderful in being able to look after me at the same time as she had to look after herself, of course. But she is a very rational person. You know, no point in sitting and be miserable about it. Let's just do what you can do. And so even though now, for example, we don't travel anymore, go on holiday and so on, there are so many other things we can do. Only 2 weeks ago, we on one night in the evening, we sat and said, let's go away for a couple of days. And we drove over to France for 4 days, and it was great.
I assume she did the driving.
She did all the driving, yeah. Lovely time.
So you, as a family, of course, have had a lot to deal with.
Yes.
And right now, you're dealing with, each other's illness to some extent.
Yes.
What are the differences in how you now cope as a couple, as opposed to when you were just unwell?
Well, I felt the same degree of compassion and care and concern when I had been diagnosed as what we as a family would feel now. I got that feeling from the very beginning. Cancer is I don't know why. Well, it's the amount of it that is existing nowadays, but you feel that's the ultimate. It isn't, of course. There are nowadays so much can be treated and so on, but nevertheless there is something final that people have about cancer.
You seem to be very either brave or matter of fact or honest. I don't know what the right term is, but you're facing up to those big issues.
Yes.
Without being too afraid of them ahead of time.
There's nothing else one can do. Everyone have passed through it. I have the feeling that if other people have done something, then I should be able to do it. And death occurs to everyone, so it doesn't worry me at all.
In some ways, if you're able to think about that, you're able to then move on to a couple of other things. One is to look at, tidying up your affairs if you want to do that, if it's appropriate. Two, to discussing things in a matter-of-fact way with your nearest and dearest, who may be struggling more than you about those things.
Yes. I think that is one point that should be taken account of. I've been lucky with that, with my wife. My daughters are still very upset and conscious about the situation. But the close family and probably need as much help as the patient, him or herself.
Oh yes, I definitely take that on board, and it's something we're learning more, ironically, even though you'd think it would be pretty plain to most healthcare professionals.
Yes.
Of course, good healthcare professionals always knew that. What's in doubt, though, is whether the organizations support resources for caregivers and families and, extended families when they need.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that it's evident yet. I hope it will come and develop more, especially at the stages of clinic visits and so on. They need more respect, more care, more attention, I think, and because they are equal, if not more sensitive to the situation.
So how's your wife getting on at the moment?
She's doing well. She's been cleared. But of course that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't come back, which she can, but she's doing very well actually. She's got her hair grown back, which she's pleased about.
Because your wife strikes me as somebody who's very proactive about getting resources and helping yourself and other people if need be as well.
She is, very much so. She was in business before we got married, so she is a very proactive person actually.
And that certain kind of personalities can help because they become an asset to you and you an asset to them as well.
Yes. It's personality means an awful lot, and one must realize that everyone can't have the same strength and character and emotions. Some just can't take it. But whatever life you have, it's still short, and it's up to you yourself to make the best out of it. And there is no reason why you shouldn't do it.
I agree.
Everyone has some close friends, and one should never give up the close friends. One should ask them to come round, and many times they come unannounced. And if you give them license to do that, then you can't turn them away. But you don't want to in any case, because they are friends, and they would realize if you're not well enough to see them.
Yes.
But they would have a few minutes with you and enjoy that.
So you can almost organize them coming rather than just leaving it.
Yes. I have friends that come to my house on Tuesdays, because my wife plays golf on Tuesdays. So they come and play bridge with me on Tuesdays. Not every Tuesday, but every now and then. And very often they say, "Oh, can we come to you then next Tuesday?" And I'm just delighted to see them, even though I'm not feeling that well at the time. But again, as I say, it's a distraction from
one thing I'm reading into that as well is the fact that you're trying to do relatively normal things with your friends. It's not just about being unwell and them giving you some sympathy.
No.
Is that fair comment?
Absolutely, yes. I think you need to have some form of activity or discussion of some kind. Otherwise it becomes rather boring, and it's difficult. It's difficult to maintain a conversation with someone that you haven't got common interests with.
And were you able to find those interests and maybe, I know you said bridge, was that something that you started after the diagnosis?
No, I played it a long time.
You had that before?
I started internet chess.
Internet chess?
Yes, after my diagnosis. And that takes up quite a bit of time. And although that the only conclusion it reaches is either winning or losing normally, it's another disturbance in a way that, or distraction, I should say. I call it disturbance because I lose more game than I win.
Do you mind losing or not?
No, I don't really mind. I like, my ambition is to improve my rating.
Yes. It can be very addictive to have a rating online.
Yes.
Because you can keep trying to push it up all the time.
Yes, you do. You want to play players of a higher rating so that if you beat them, it improves your situation.
Yes.
And the risk is if you play with lower rating,
and you lose.
They are,
you go down.
You go down. But it's good exercise for your brain. And if you own a computer, you can do it because you can. It costs you nothing.
On which site is this that you go?
Chess.com.
Oh, it's
and you can get the lectures there. So basic lectures, how the moves are and so on to start off.
Well, that's good.
And it's very helpful. And a friend of mine put me onto that only a year or so ago. And I look at that every morning and every evening. I check and make moves.
Very good. I'm impressed. That's a good tip as well for anyone who's got computer at home.
Yes.
Which raises a question about resources in general. What do you think about the state of resources out there for cancer patients in general?
Well, I have relatively limited experience, more than from my own cancer and my wife's, and of course my daughter. Somehow the charitable resources are more like Hope Foundation and Lauros. They certainly have more time. They have more detail in their care in a way. The NHS is rather business-like, and the personal compassion is not very evident.
No, and definitely,
which one can understand with the...
Definitely not online. The NHS hasn't really embraced any kind of online technology yet.
No.
And I've got doubts that it will in the near future, because they are actually surprisingly business-like internally.
Yes.
Regarding commissioning and being paid and keeping the resources, where it needs to be and being measured. So they're a bit conservative in that regard.
It's so much financial control that they simply haven't got time, or
which is surprising given the it's one of the biggest employers in the world.
It is,
and the amount of budget that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yes, but the larger the amount, the more pressure normally. But it's. I have to say, all the people I've been in contact with, I have nothing but the highest respect for. I think their resources are somewhat limited in many respects. And they shouldn't have to fight for treatments and where they see the right opportunities existing. And they have to. They have to fight against bureaucracy and politicians. And that, to me, I know that they can't just go out and spend madly. But nevertheless, there should be perhaps. But then, of course, it has to be paid for, and we all have to pay for it in due course.
I mean, that's the fundamental issue, isn't it? The population as a whole has to pay for it in their taxes, national insurance.
Yes.
And it's not totally clear to every person what they're contributing to the NHS.
No.
When they need it and they generally receive that care, they do appreciate it, and they sing often the praises of the NHS.
Yes.
But from a government's point of view, they try to keep the funding relatively low because it's such a massive spend as a block of the whole government spending that they need to keep it low in order to recoup this national debt. Anyway, we're straying slightly off the topic here.
Yeah.
Let's come back to yourself and where you think things are going in the future.
Well, I'm pleased every day I wake up and get out of bed. I've had a long time over my allowed one, and I know that it can't last forever. So, and I know I also believe that there won't be a cure in my time, and if there was, my condition had gone to progress too far to be able to be affected by the cure. All I'm hoping for is that one will have a peaceful passing one day when it happens, and that up to then people will not, I will be have good relationships, and when it happens I hope they will take it the way I've done, that I've had a good life, and they should be happy about that and not miserable, and that really is all I have to look forward to.
Well, I personally am inspired by everything you've said today, and I really hope that things do go well for you and you continue to outdo the estimates, and that maybe we can record something of a follow-up in a year's time. We can see how you're doing then.
I'll be delighted to. If I'm around, I will be delighted to. Yes.
All the best then. Take care.
Thank you very much, and you.